see that a couple people have joined us, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. And as people come in, they can join in and follow along. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. And thanks to Foodshed Alliance for hosting this webinar. My name is Dr. Saul Bautista, and I'm coming to you from Ethos Farm to Health, which is a local farm located in Morris County in Long Valley, New Jersey. And today, I really want to talk about why a great farmer is essentially a great doctor. And I hope that by the end of my talk, this will be very clear. I know right now this may not make a lot of sense, but I hope that by the end of our talk, this will. And here I have pictured two local organic regenerative farmers. This is our very own farmer, Nora, from Ethos Farm, and down in southern New Jersey from Free Haven Farms. So I'm going to zoom out for a little bit and really talk about, from a big picture perspective, what is that relationship between soil health and human health, and how does it come about? And really, our health outcomes are really driven by factors that are outside of what happens in clinical care. Really, what I do in a clinical environment, only 10% of that really accounts for people's health outcomes. The other 10% is really just having access to clinical care. So in reality, what I do only affects 20% of what people's outcomes are. Really, it's socioeconomic factors to include education, income, job status, the physical environment, and people's health behaviors that really dictate 80% of what happens to us. And for today's purposes, I'm really going to focus on diet and nutrition and the food system and the local food environment and how that impacts us. So what we know today is that the standard American eating pattern, which is excessively high in processed foods, refined grains, excessive animal food consumption, high in fat, cholesterol, excess added sugars, really that's driving the increase in prevalence of obesity and cardiovascular diseases like hypertension, acute coronary syndromes, diabetes, and also certain types of cancers, notably gastrointestinal cancers. One of the things that we're noticing now is that younger people are having an incidence of colon cancer. And so before, we used to see it more prevalent in people aged 50 to 55. Now we're seeing it in people down to about 40 years old, 38. And really, there's been a big push to try to start screening people at a younger age. And so when we look at what we're eating or what we're consuming, really the majority of food, again, it's processed foods. A quarter of our dietary pattern consists of animal foods, which are meat, dairy, eggs, fish, and seafood. And only a very small portion of that is plant foods. And really amongst that 12%, only half of that 12% is actually whole foods. The rest is actually processed plant foods, which we'll talk about in a bit as to what that means. And so I just want to define a little bit about processed foods and what this means, just for a little bit of clarity, because there tends to be some nuance in terms of the semantics. So an ultra processed food really tends to be the food that we find is most associated with causing harm or inducing disease. And these are foods which have been have had additives included in them or have had essential parts of the original food removed. And it's really sourced from, typically sourced from like corn, soy, wheat. There'll be fat added to it. There'll be other refined chemicals added to that. You can have foods that are processed that are still within health promoting eating patterns. So you have your beans, that have been sort of stored in water. Same thing with corn, or if you have fruit slices that are in their natural juices without added sugars and syrups that are in a container, or even when you go to the store and you buy prepackaged fruit that's been sort of cut and is in a container, that's processed, but it's not ultra processed, meaning that it's still in its relative original form without significant additives, without having significant parts of the essential food removed. And then we have unprocessed foods, which are generally found the way you find them in nature. And so the question is, what is a health promoting eating pattern? I think, and this is funny to me because I like to use this meme because you'll here you have 4 different labels. And when you look at the types of foods that are included here, essentially they're the same. And no matter what clinical guideline we look at, whether you're looking at clinical guidelines for diabetes or for heart disease, hypertension, or recommendations from our medical society, the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, it comes down to the same factors and there's the same common pattern. And that pattern is an eating pattern that mostly includes minimally processed fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts, seeds, and herbs. And it limits the consumption of animal products to include red meat, poultry, fish, eggs, and dairy, and avoids ultra-processed foods entirely. Again, it's a predominantly plant-based eating pattern with limited amounts of animal products if you choose to include them. Some folks choose not to include them for a variety of reasons, whether it be ethical or environmental reasons. At Ethos, in our clinical practice, we tend to adopt a whole food plant-based eating pattern without added salt, oil, or sugar, and that excludes animal products simply because that is what we have found that has a great deal of clinical efficacy within our patients that are trying to reverse disease. Again, I think when we're in a disease reversal, when that's the goal, we tend to be a little bit more aggressive with how stringent the eating pattern is to be as close to something that's health promoting. But again, if you're targeting prevention, there's many different ways and many different patterns that per the current literature you can engage with. And I always include this slide only because I really like to emphasize that people will sometimes conflate these two things, and plant-based and vegan doesn't necessarily equate to a health promoting eating pattern. Again, on the left, again, this is it's all plant-based. It's all made from things that come from plants. But again, you'll have the processed mac and cheese, you'll have the vegan cookie, you'll have your fries that were probably soaked and fried, deep fried. And again, versus what we have on the right, which is, again, mostly whole plants that are not processed, that are pretty much as they are, the way that we find them in nature. And again, that aligns more with the clinical recommendations and guidelines. And the reason I stress this is because we have this view of nutrition where we think micronutrients, we think vitamin A, vitamin C, zinc. And really what the modern literature is telling us is that an eating pattern and eating patterns of people are better predictors of a health outcome. And so really that's what we should be looking at. And I give you these examples here because what I have found in clinical practice is that as a general public and people, we tend to overestimate how well of an eating pattern we have, and versus in reality what we really do. These are so the examples that I show you here from top left, I'll go one by one. This is what's sold within an academic campus at a local state university here. And what we tend to find is instead of a great deal of fresh fruits and vegetables, it's just a bunch of processed foods, ultra processed foods at that. Here to the right, with the Lay's potato chips and the sodas, that was actually the congratulations that was offered to a group of pre-health students by an unnamed medical institution in the state. It says here, congrats, future health professionals and doctors. We're going to give you the very thing that the clinical guidelines say is disease promoting. On the bottom left here, this is what's being fed to patients in the hospital. You can have your deep fried French fries with your chicken nugget and your vanilla ice cream that's processed. And on the bottom right here is, again, this was at a conference by an organization, a pre-health organization that was focused on prevention. And you can have your ultra processed Oreos, ultra processed cupcakes, ultra processed chips, ultra processed cookies, you know, celebrating prevention. Again, here on the top left, again, that is a wonderful health promoting sandwich that was offered to a patient in the hospital. And again, these are real photos. These are the photos that I have taken myself because I want people to know that this really happens. This is what I witness on a daily basis. Again, this is what is fed to residents and medical students. And again, in an unnamed medical institution. Same here with fries in the sandwich. And these are 2 carts from a local supermarket. When I just happened to be going to the supermarket, I captured some images of what is the general consumer consuming. And again, as we see here, it tends to be a cart full of pretty much processed foods. So here, a little game time for our audience. Now, knowing what you know now, if you had to choose, which of the 2 items would you choose aligns more with the health promoting eating pattern? So if you wanted to have a burger, on the right, we have a lentil walnut burger. And on the left, we have our typical burger. And it's not to say that you have to give up your burger, but it's how do we include more health promoting foods to our meals? And again, I'll just give another 5 more seconds, just again, for the audience to kind of capture that. Similarly here, again, and again, these are real meals. These are all meals that I captured, either going out with friends and taking a picture of what they ate versus, let's say, a picture of the right of what the doctor ate. And similarly here, this is went out to breakfast with some friends at a local resort. And so knowing what you know now, which eating pattern aligns more with the scientific literature? And I know that the current sentiments or commentary may be, Doc, I already knew this stuff. Like, I know that fruits and vegetables are good, are good for me. Like, people say that all the time. Oh yeah, I go to the doctor, he tells me, yeah, eat more fruits and vegetables. And while yes, that is very common advice, the idea is we really need to emphasize those examples. Again, when people talk about nutrition, they tend to think of vitamin D, micronutrients, protein, and really the conversation should be toward shifting our eating patterns and what we're eating. Like, someone doesn't go to the store and pick up, oh, hey, I'm going to have zinc for breakfast today. No, we eat, people have a variety of things that they eat. They either eat fruit or they eat oatmeal, or there's a variety of things. So really, we should start to shift the conversation toward eating patterns. And something that we've discovered sort of in the last 15 to 20 years, it's the role that food plays in altering something called the gut microbiome. So the gut microbiome really is, it's a compilation of all the microorganisms and its interactions with our gut cells. So all the bacteria, fungi, viruses, and metabolites that these microorganisms produce and how they impact or how they interact with our cells. And I'm going to go ahead here and just go down the line with you. So on the left, what we know is that when we eat a diet that's high in unprocessed plant foods, those plant foods undergo fermentation, and the microbiota, or the microbes in our gut, break down the fiber into short chain fatty acids. And there's 3 specific short chain fatty acids that we know is of benefit to humans, and that drives cellular changes. And so those 3 are propionate, acetate, and butyrate. And there's one example here. For example, propionate and acetate will bind with a receptor that drives the release of these gut hormones. One is GLP-1, and GLP-1 is the same molecule that's associated with that weight loss drug called Ozempic. Ozempic is what's known as a GLP-1 agonist. So essentially, there's an associated role between the type of diet that we eat, the release of our own innate GLP-1, and how that affects our feelings of satiety, gut motility. There's another effect also that those same molecules here in the diagram to the right will interact with the receptors that will then produce different signaling molecules that will regulate our immune system. This is very important because the conversation is that our standard American diet that's high in animal fat and protein and lots of processed foods, it alters the type of metabolites that are produced by the microbes, and it also changes the types of microbes that we have in our gut. And then that in turn dysregulates our immune system, right? And this is very important because we're starting to see a rise in autoimmune diseases. And interestingly, when we start to change people's diets and put them more, we take someone who's on a regular standard American diet, and when they come to us at Ethos, we put them on a very prescriptive eating plan and eating pattern. What we've noticed is that, all of a sudden, there's symptoms of rheumatoid arthritis or lupus now go away. And people say, oh my gosh, this is the best I've felt in 5 to 10 years, and I don't have the swelling anymore. And in some cases, they're able to come off a lot of their immunosuppressant medication or their steroids that they use to combat those symptoms. And again, and it's all, and we think the connection is that when we improve the microbiome, and now we don't have the dysbiosis or the dysregulation of the immune system that's induced by our diet, people get better. And this is just an example. And the reason I'm presenting this is because the same way we have a microbiome for humans, that exists in the soil. And plants have their own microbiome that's important to them. And what's interesting is that the human microbiome is actually a little bit less diverse than the microbiome and microbiota that's found surrounding the soil and plants, and also the microbiota within animals. And so, and again, this is why having a diverse eating pattern. Let's see here. There's a question. I'll get back to that. That's why having a diverse eating pattern where you eat a variety of foods is actually very, very beneficial. Similarly, this is why caring for our soil and what we do to plants is very important. Let me move on here. So the way that we farm actually matters. And part of the reason being is that when we monocrop and when we don't maintain microbial diversity or plant diversity, when we introduce agrochemicals, it impacts the microbial diversity and the organic matter and the molecules in the soil. And again, plants have their own microbiome or so-called rhizosphere. So the roots of the plants and within the soil has its own sort of ecosystem with its own bacteria, fungi, viruses, the same microbiome that we have in our gut. Plants have their own, and soil have their own microbiome as well. And there's also metabolites, and the metabolites go both ways. So the plants themselves, depending on their health, what they'll produce is they'll produce these organic acids, amino acids, glucose molecules, and little plant sort of phytohormones, right? That communicate and signal with bacteria. And the bacteria in the soil will do the same as well, right? The bacteria, they'll produce metabolites that help the plant fixate nitrogen, makes phosphorus more soluble and be able to help the plant to uptake that. So, and the reason that, again, this is important is because our farming practices affect the microdiversity of the soil and the quality of our soil. And I introduce here glyphosate as an example. So the literature tells us right now that industrial agriculture, the use of fertilizers and pesticides, it reduces microbial diversity. And we do that to increase yield. Now, theoretically, if we had healthy soils, we would have increased yields. But because we monocrop, we keep taking from the soil and not replenishing the soil in ways that nature intended, we have to resort to other means. So we add synthetic fertilizers. So we add pesticides to control weeds. Plants themselves produce their own, let's just call them hormones for now, that help with pest resistance, right? And help to combat diseases, plant diseases. But with alterations in the microbiome and the plant themselves, they can't produce some of these hormones, or they can't produce some of these amino acids or peptides that are common to the plant. And so I'll use glyphosate, which is a chemical that's currently being studied pretty extensively. Glyphosate is used pretty much to kill weeds. And what it does is that it inhibits an enzyme along a pathway that helps to create branched chain amino acids. And so these are 3 amino acids: tryptophan, phenylalanine, and tyrosine. And so what happens is that glyphosate blocks an enzyme here, which is enol pyroshikimate phosphate synthase, right here, which blocks the production of this intermediate to this chemical here. And I'll avoid the names so as to not overwhelm you all. But ultimately, what it leads is to a decreased production of these amino acids, and then these amino acids, the plant tries to use to synthesize specific proteins. So if we're constantly bombarding plants with not only glyphosate, but other agrochemicals, we're inhibiting a lot of its natural biological pathways and functions that the plant uses for its own health. And so I hope that we're starting to connect the dots here between how having a good, healthy soil microbiome and plant microbiome will then lead to a healthy human microbiome. Because the other thing as well is that a lot of the microbes and microdiversity that's found in the soil is on the plant itself. And then when we ingest those plants, it helps to enrich and diversify our microbiome. So, and introduces good bacteria to us as well. And so you can imagine that when we reduce the microdiversity of the soil, that in itself will reduce our microbial biodiversity as well. So it's important that we eat a diet that's rich in whole plant foods, lots of salads, fruit, raw vegetables that are free of pesticides. Again, when we farm conventionally, we use all these herbicides, fertilizers, we reduce the soil diversity. And again, we have a poor microbiome. And there's a hypothesis that this is why kids that grow up on farms, like their exposure to, again, to a rich sort of environment of microbes and biodiversity, they have less incidence of of allergies and disease. And so really, I really want to reframe what we think of healthcare and what we think of doctoring. So to me, we tend to think of pharmacotherapy and surgery as healthcare. And what I hope this talk has done so far is reframe things for you. And what doctoring looks like to me is something like this. This was our first year of medical school, and Dr. Weiss would take us out to his fields. And I remember to this day, he pulled out a carrot out of the ground, gave it to me and said, "Eat it." And I was like, "What?" And I looked at him with this crazy look, like, "What? This thing is dirty. This carrot has dirt all over it. You want me to eat this?" Because in my naive mind, growing up in the urban concrete jungle of Newark, New Jersey, dirt isn't good. And Dr. Weiss was like, "No, this is actually the way we grow food here. There's good bacteria on these crops, and this will help feed the good bacteria in your gut." And I looked at him like he had 10 heads. And now today, I can appreciate how astute and ahead of his time he was. It's doctors healthcare, what it looks like to me is doctors supporting local farmers markets, farm and vendors, advocating to young people, high school students and college students, the importance of agriculture and the relationship between agriculture and disease, and why we should care for our soils, why we should care for the environment, why we should support local farmers, why we should care about the Farm Bill. Again, and these are just other examples of some of the college students that we worked with when we would take them into urban gardening environments. And again, we tried to not only emphasize and support that, but encourage future health professionals, our pre-meds, to realize that this is important. That again, our farmer is important, and as physicians, we have a responsibility to advocate and be that voice. And this was Dr. Weiss. He went a couple months ago to support Congressman Blumenauer in reforms to the Food and Farm Act. So really quickly to close, if you had to take away anything from this presentation, really the idea is that we should be eating more whole plant foods with little to no processing. You should trade any ultra processed food for something either that you make at home and that's natural and less processed. We should try to reduce our red and processed meat consumption. And again, support your local organic regenerative farmer. If you have a choice, show up to the farmer's market. Go find a reputable farmer that you should trust, that you know their growing methods, and vote with your dollar. And we should contribute to healthy soils. So again, food waste is a big issue. So any food scraps, compost or find the local composting service. Let's give back and reinvest into our soils, into our environment. And again, advocacy is important. So let your voice be heard with the upcoming Farm Bill. I hope that, again, this slide is making a little bit more sense. And again, in our practice, what we do is we try to reverse disease by changing people's lifestyle. And we do that by changing their diet and eating patterns. If it wasn't for Nora and what she does and how she grows food, it'd be very difficult for me to do my job. And so again, if we didn't have farmers and farmers markets where we're able to obtain great produce, great food, we wouldn't be able to keep ourselves well. So again, a great farmer is essentially a great doctor. And a couple final words. I promise I am a real physician. This is my academic pedigree. Went to medical school here and did most of my undergraduate here. Went to Greenville, South Carolina, where I did residency training for 3 years in internal medicine, pediatrics, and family medicine. And I'm transitioning now actually to preventative medicine and my passion, which is something called the lifestyle medicine. And so these are essentially the 6 pillars of lifestyle medicine. And to define that, lifestyle medicine, really, it's just a medical discipline. And we focus on 6 pillars. We use a whole food, plant predominant eating pattern, physical activity, sleep, stress management, the avoidance of risky substances, and social connectedness to not only treat, but in many cases, reverse chronic disease. And again, I am very passionate about that because I've seen how well people can become. When you take a patient who has had high blood pressure and diabetes, is on insulin, and they make these changes, and now they're normal, and they come off their medication, and they're so grateful that they have a new lease on life. I cannot tell you like how that feels, like, but to see another human being, to be full of joy, to feel good, and to be so grateful, I cannot tell you. And so I am very passionate about this field because this is the first time I've seen doctors actually do this and emphasize this in clinical practice. And so I take a lot of pride in lifestyle medicine physicians and the field of lifestyle medicine and what they're doing nationwide to advocate for this. These are some citations that I did not include in the slides in case you were interested, and I'm happy to share these. And a final plug. I know I covered things very briefly and sort of from a big picture view, but if you want to learn more, we do have a series of distinguished speakers that are going to join us early September for our Key Mark event, Ethos Farm Days. So if you're hungry for more, no pun intended, definitely there'll be very talented speakers, way more talented than me. So you're more than happy to come out. Thank you again. Thank you for having me. And that is all. And I will take any questions if anyone has any questions.
I know there was one that, well, thank you so much. That was amazing overview of everything. But I know Alice put a question in here. Is there room for cheese, dairy, and milks such as almond, soy, etc. in the whole foods diet?
So it all depends. So there's a variety of dietary modalities, and it all depends on how you define it. So within what's called a DASH or Mediterranean eating pattern, yes. So in those eating patterns, they're again predominantly plant-based, but they do allow for the inclusion of lean meats such as poultry and fish. The USDA, if you look at the dietary guidelines, what they do have a set amount. So for example, they'll say that for a 2,000 calorie diet, you're allowed a maximum of 30 ounces per week, or actually, correction, 33 ounces per week. Now, within sort of a more stringent or whole food plant-based eating pattern as defined by the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, usually what that interpretation, some providers will exclude all animal products. And the only reason that that's done is because for a number of patients and sort of what we've seen is that when patients are trying to reverse disease, it's actually really helpful in that it doesn't induce sort of like an autoimmune or inflammatory response once those things are removed. So dairy has an inflammatory response in a number of patients. So does meat. So it all depends on what your personal health goals are. Again, there are some people that do just fine. Again, and there's a lot of variety, but I think the general takeaway when you look at a population as a whole is really just sort of like those dishes that I presented to you, mostly plants. And again, if you choose to include meat, if that's your preference, in limited amounts. Someone said here, what kind of oil in the walnut lentil burger? I see that question. So, again, our clinical practice preference at Ethos is we avoid any added oils unless they come in the plant food themselves. So, avocado has tons of oil in it. The distinction is that it's combined with the plant fibers, plant phytonutrients. Same things with the olives. We tell folks, hey, if you want to get your fats, like eat the avocado, eat the walnut, or maybe I may be misinterpreting the question in that is the question the kind of fat in the lentil walnut burgers? Do you mean that it's an unsaturated fat, which is more of the health promoting fat that aligns with the clinical guidelines? I may have misinterpreted the question. I don't know if that was the intent.
Hey, Dr. Bautista, it's Warren Love. Thanks for answering that question. Yeah, I was just kidding, and I kind of knew the answer beforehand. I didn't want to see any seed oils or soy oils in there, but that's how I was trying to make the decision between the burger and the and the other one. Yeah. But by the way, thanks so much for this. I'm on the board at Foodshed, so really appreciate all of this. Just read a book called Epigenetics and really like this topic and how it dovetails into this new research. So thank you so much. Bye, Tess.
Oh, that is fantastic. And I was telling Tess for the nature of this webinar, I mean, I could probably speak for 4 to 5 hours, taking a deep dive into every topic from, again, micronutrient, cell interactions, cell signaling mechanisms, epigenetics. I mean, just the soil alone, we can probably talk about soil micro plant interactions for multiple hours. But I like to keep things brief to about 30 minutes and give the highlights and maybe expand upon some of these topics in other webinars.
Well, tell me this is of interest. There are grants for people to test soil for other farmers. Ethos is great. And I can't wait to go there. I live down the street in Highbridge.
Oh, fantastic. But
I talked to some folks and they didn't understand what the benefit of having good soil was. So I'm going to point them in the direction of this webinar.
Oh, I think we would probably need another whole webinar. I mean, there is so much scientific literature now that discuss, again, I mean, there's a great review paper, and I can send an email if people want to dive a little bit deeper, talking about different farming methods and how those different farming methods affect soil microdiversity. So things such as like cover cropping, right? Like how different forms of cover crops and different types of cover crops, how that'll induce different microbial types, different metabolites. I mean, yeah, there's so much, but I'm happy to include those in like a follow-up email to Tess and to everyone who attended today if they want to learn more.
Yeah, that would be great. I always follow up with the recording to everyone. So if we could include like the slides and extra resources, that would be great too. And I do see another question in the Q&A. How do you feel about cold pressed oil? For instance, pressing a whole walnut and consuming the oil and other parts separately according to your diet needs.
So that's an excellent question. And I think hypothetically, the idea is that A lot of the oils that are sold when we buy them from the supermarket, they're actually not as they come from nature. They've undergone very harsh industrial process, where the oils are extracted with solvents. So like they use hexane, and also that they're adulterated, so that when you purchase it, so in reality, the question is, are you really consuming the what you think you're consuming? And so for that reason, a lot of folks, what they try to do is they try to buy oils that, to your point, have not undergone industrial processing using solvents. That again, it's pressed, and from the pressing itself, or the oil is secreted. Now, that what I'm unsure of is the literature. So again, hypothetically, the idea is that you retain most of the phytonutrients and the properties that come along with the oil. That I'm unclear of. I need to take a deep dive into the scientific literature to see in more recent times what sort of effects does it have? Are there cell-cell interactions? Are there enzymatic changes? Those sorts of things. That's something that I need to take a deep dive into. But no, I guess if you had to say, I guess again, hypothetically, you'd probably want to lean closer, as close to nature as possible. So if it's not just directly eating it the way that it comes, so eating the olive, eating the walnut, sort of cold pressed from a manufacturer that is reputable would probably be the next step. Is there research? I think there's a question here, Karina. Is there research on the power of making lifestyle changes like the way we eat in a community environment? Yes, that is a great question. So the question is there power in making lifestyle changes, for example, the way that we eat within a community environment? Like, is it helpful to have your family and friends also adopt changes as well? So a central pillar to lifestyle medicine is social connection. Yeah, and one of the health behavior change theories is social cognitive theory, which essentially says that we learn from others. We learn when others model certain behaviors, and also that same modeling of behavior increases our self-efficacy or our own personal confidence in being able to engage in that same behavior. So, and we see that all, and actually we've seen that actually in group visits with patients, like when patients come together in sort of like these learning groups, and we've done that at Ethos, the magic is they start exchanging ideas amongst each other, and they become inspired when someone else has had a good result. When someone else says, hey, I've lost 30 pounds. I feel great. It's the best I've ever felt. And this is what I did. And they start exchanging tips and tricks. Like they'll say, hey, like I have a really big sweet tooth. And the way I overcame my sweet tooth is I started making like this frozen banana pseudo ice cream where I freeze bananas. I take a teaspoon of peanut butter. I mix it together. I blend it. And that's my ice cream. And it's really incredible. And what's really cool about it is that sometimes as a physician, you can just sit back and the community members or the patients themselves would just take care of themselves. They exchange tips and tricks. They share information and knowledge with each other. But that comes once a person reaches a very high level of competence. Like they're very well informed. They know a lot of the research. They've been practicing this themselves for quite a bit of time. And once they do that and they've achieved things for themselves, they really start to share that with others because they want to, it's like anything. When you find gold, you want to share that with other people and you want to share good things with other people and that naturally happens. So I think it's extremely important that this happens communally. Well, I think that's all the questions. And if that's all the questions, again, thank you to everyone for your attention, for Foodshed Alliance, for hosting this webinar and being such a gracious host. Thank you for having me. And again, hope to see you all again, and feel free to send any questions our way.
Great. Thanks so much, Dr. Bautista. And thank you everybody for coming this evening. Like we were saying before, we'll follow up with the slides and the recording. And if it's okay with you, Dr. Bautista, I'll include your email in there. And maybe if anyone has any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out. But have a great night, everybody. Thank you. Also, hi, Warren. Sorry, I didn't mean to ignore you. Good night.
Good night,
Take
everyone.
care.